Hello, members. I'm Tom Morrison. Welcome to Heat Treat Live here based in Jacksonville, Florida. I'm Tom Morrison, the CEO of MTI Management. We've got Jordan here from NAM with us, which we'll introduce in a few moments. What I like to always start off with is if you look down at the bottom and hover your cursor over the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little icon called chat. You can hit that and up will pop to the right-hand side a chat box, and you can look down there right over here and you can see I've typed in, so what city is everybody listening from? We're in Jacksonville, Florida. Be great if you type in the bottom where you're listening from so we can see who you're with. And then if you have a question as I'm interviewing Jordan on anything we're talking about with the whole State of the Union address and the government affairs and what we're doing in policy, you can type that in there and we'll do the best to moderate it and ask Jordan those questions. So what I'd like to do real quick is take a couple of announcements for MTI, some exciting things we got going on. I know training is a huge deal in this industry because you can't afford to have your managers micromanaging everybody. So the more they know, the better it is for them, lower error rates. And I just want to encourage y'all to go out to our website at mtiacademy.com. You can see these great dynamic recommended flow of certificate programs. We have 4 to 5 of you to choose from, training your people on management as well as training them on a bunch of different technical stuff as well as safety. So get that out there. The other next thing is our monthly sales and reporting program. If you're not in our reporting program, you want to be a part of this. This is the types of graphs that you get to see where it tells you what your 12-month history is. And then you get to be a part of webinars and a full-page, 8-page quarterly report that tells you the 1, 2, and 3-year predictions. And that's a key to buying big furnaces and adding labor is to be able to predict with precision what is going on in the future. So we're excited about that. If you're not that, you can go to heattreat.net and click on the benefits tab, and you can click on any one of our 10 major benefits and get involved in those. And the last thing I'll share is this number right here, $50,000. That is the number that the foundation board has approved for scholarships for 2019, starting March 1, that will be released. So if you know any young person who is looking for money to go to college, they're giving away one $15,000 founder scholarship, a series of 5,000s, and they're giving away 7 $1,500 scholarships for that person that doesn't want to go to a 4-year school, but wants to go into technical training and get involved in the technical work of heat treating. So lots of money to be given around and lots of money to help us attract in the younger generation. We've given away $42,000 the last 2 years total combined. So we're starting to put our money where our mouth is to pull that back in. So let everyone know. So we're not here to talk about all that today. Today we're here to talk with Jordan Stoick from the National Association of Manufacturers. He's the Vice President of Government Affairs. Jordan, welcome to Heat Treat Live.
Thank you, Tom, and hello everyone. It's great to be with you.
So Jordan, real quick, your job, what you're doing every day, tell us a little bit about who Jordan is and what your day's like on the Hill.
Sure. Well, as the Vice President of Government Relations here at the NAM, I work with all of our policy professionals here to relay our message, the manufacturing message on policy to Capitol Hill offices, to the members of the House and the Senate and their key staffers, as well as the agencies that impact the federal agencies, EPA and the Treasury Department on tax regulations, all of those policymakers. So we are a typical day for us in the lobbying shop of the NAM isn't so much spent here in the office. It's either up on Capitol Hill here in Washington, D.C., meeting with lawmakers or their staff, or meeting with key policy staffers in the federal agencies to talk about what they need to do, what they shouldn't do, and help to when they are working on something, we'll often they'll ask us for our technical input, and we'll bring in our policy professionals so that they don't do anything that's going to hinder the growth in the manufacturing sector.
Well, before we get into the policy discussion, I know a lot of people out there ask themselves, does my vote count? Does my phone call, does my letter, does my email count? And what I want members to understand is we have a great relationship with NAM. We're a member of the Council of Manufacturing Associations, which is 250 plus manufacturing groups, just like MTI in the chemical field, the forestry field, the wood, the power, you name it, there's an association for it. And they're members of this council. And between those 250 associations, I think it's somewhere north of 120,000 businesses that employ millions and millions of people, that every time they get behind an issue, Jordan, you would say that has a great impact when they're all working together, wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I will put my former hat on. Professionally, I spent about a dozen years before coming to the NAM working on Capitol Hill. 6 of those years as a chief of staff. And I know that the power, the advocacy power of people out in what I call the real world, outside of Washington, D.C. It's one thing for somebody like me to go up to speak with a member of Congress or their staff. It's an entirely another thing if it's somebody from their hometown, from their district, from their state, with real world examples on what is happening, how legislation or a regulation or a proposed reg would impact them. And so it certainly is powerful, and your for your members, for everyone who's listening today, whether it's, if Tom gives you a legislative update or an action item and asks you to contact your member of Congress or your senator, please do. It absolutely is impactful. Those stories and those anecdotes really can help move the needle. So
we had the last election, and the House got controlled by the Democrats. We've had the State of the Union out there with Trump. Before we get into the meat of the matter, what is your members, our members, heat treat for just about all your members out there that have metal involved in their process and product? So what are your members saying about the state of the economy, the state of the current political environment? What's going on in their minds?
Well, it's our membership, their outlook is overwhelmingly positive. At the NAM, we do a quarterly survey and have to our membership, a quarterly outlook survey, and have for about 20 years. And one of the standard staple questions in that is, what do you have a positive outlook for the future of your business, of your company? And last year, the average over the 4 quarters of 2018, the response rate was 92% positive, which was record-breaking. In the 20 plus years that the NAM had been doing that survey, it had never been that high. We're actually going to be releasing in the coming days the first quarter of 2019 statement or results, and I can't get into any of the numbers, but from what I've seen, the positive streak is going to continue. And I think that is a result of the policy changes that have happened just in the past couple of years, with the Trump administration coming in, and in 2017, at the end of 2017, passing comprehensive tax reform that incentivized growth and investment in companies, as well as a smart approach to regulation. The president came in, and I think it was music to manufacturers and a lot of folks' ears, and basically said, we are going to right size this kind of out of control regulatory environment.
Right.
Excuse me. And so I think those are some of the things that are behind that positive outlook, but other economic indicators are bearing that out as well. The U.S. Commerce Department just released the 4th quarter of 2018 GDP, gross domestic product numbers this morning, which showed that in the 4th quarter, the American economy grew by 2.6%, which was a little bit higher than I think people had anticipated, because we had the government shut down. And if you remember, in the stock market in December, there was kind of a little blip. So there was a little bit of a scare at the end of last year, but 2.6% is still good growth. And year over year, it resulted in last year economic growth being over 3%, which is a fantastic growth number for our country.
If everybody was like me in November, I got to January and went, why didn't I sell in November? It's amazing the tumble that the market took in December, but it's come back tremendously the last 45 days, which is all a positive thing.
Yeah.
So Trump had his State of the Union address. Was there any surprises that came out of that? And what could our members here at Metal Treating Institute, along with NAM, what could they expect in the next 12 months or so from that?
Well, from my perspective, watching the State of the Union speech, there really weren't that many surprises. In this day and age, in the 24-hour news cycle, and with
especially with his Twitter stream,
with a president who's tweeting 18 hours out of the day, sometimes sometimes it seems like 24 hours a day. There aren't that many secrets or surprises anymore, it seems. The big focus of the speech, I think most people would agree, was on immigration, specifically on the border wall, in his promise to build a border wall. He spent a lot of time talking about that. He also, unsurprisingly, talked about the economy, as we just mentioned, and tax reform and regulatory reform, and how job growth was back, wage growth was back, and one of the an item I didn't mention earlier regarding the positive economic or the positive outlook for manufacturers is another key indicator. Manufacturing job growth in our sector was stronger last year in 2018 than it had been in 2 decades. So certainly things are, I don't think the president mentioned that in his State of the Union specifically, but that was just a point that I wanted to make. Some of the other items, the issues that the president spoke about, prescription drug pricing, getting prescription drugs under control, prices under control. He also spent a little bit of time talking about infrastructure. I think we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in our conversation, and that's of course something very important to manufacturers and us here at the NAM. But the USMCA, United States Mexico Canada Trade Agreement, which is the renewed version of NAFTA, kind of NAFTA 2.0, if you will. He spent time talking about that, which wasn't a surprise, but is a critically important trade agreement that we are actively engaged here at the NAM in educating and talking with members of Congress to get them into the position where they can approve that at some point this year.
Right.
So those were, I think the president, he, from what I read, some of the polling that was done across the country, I think his speech was pretty well received. He talked a lot about the need to bring people together in unity, but he also said some things that I think were pretty polarizing. And so we went into the speech a pretty polarized country politically. And I think we came out of the speech in the exact same place.
Right. So let's diverge just to immigration just for a second. We're going to hit on some policy issues later, but I know people listening on this webcast, immigration is so important because when you look at it, we're at less than a 4% unemployment rate. We have a record number of jobs being created, but we also have a record number of people that are we have more record number of jobs that are unfulfilled. And I heard a stat from a labor economist that we had at one point 990,000 jobs more than people to employ them at one point. So there's got to be a balance of protecting borders versus having a viable process that allows people to come into this country who want to really be workers and have the American dream concept. Where do you see the future falling out on that in terms of immigration reform? What can our members expect, and what kind of hope can they have, maybe?
Yeah, well, you're exactly right about the need for the workforce needs in our country. And the Manufacturing Institute, which is the nonprofit arm of the National Association of Manufacturers, recently did a study that found there are about 500,000 manufacturing jobs open right now in the country, and that number is going to swell in the coming years to millions of openings. And to your point, with a strong economy, which of course we all want, there are fewer workers left looking for work and more jobs needing to be filled. And so on the immigration front, that's critically important, not just to your members, but to the entire economy and all manufacturers. And that's something that we hear from all of our members. And as a result of that, we actually just here at the NAM last week released a comprehensive proposal to Congress and the administration, but to the American public as well, called A Way Forward. It was a comprehensive immigration plan that, as our president and CEO Jay Timmons stated, this is something where we realize, all sides are going to find a little something that they don't like in this, but frankly, that is immigration is a complex and difficult issue. That's the reason why it hasn't been addressed to date. Everyone realizes the system needs to be reformed, but it's proven so difficult that it continues to be a kind of a raging debate today. But the NAM's comprehensive proposal that we put forth, addresses everything from border security and building a wall and fencing and technology to secure our border, but then also reforming the way that we legally allow people into the country with a focus more on workforce needs than has been in the past.
So let's kind of shift gears now to the House took over, the Democrats took over the House. What is kind of the demeanor you think we're going to see between now and 2020? I think that's everybody's concern and focus, just because when you have parties fighting it out, one doesn't want to see things doing very well. Unfortunately, the reality of it is, because if it's going great, then the other party has an easier chance to win and take the presidency or win back the House, whatever. So with the now divided power, what do you think is going to happen the next 23?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tom, and it's one of our main charges here at the NAM is to continue pushing policy solutions forward, whether it's infrastructure or immigration or workforce, or continuing to educate on the need to not undo tax reform that was passed in 2017 or regulatory reform. And it's challenging because we're trying to do good public policy in a very political environment. And as you mentioned, we have a new, this time last year, the Republicans had control of the House. Republicans had control of the Senate, and of course, with President Trump in the White House, they had the executive branch as well. We're now in an era of divided government, which in the best of times, can be challenging. With Speaker Pelosi and the new House Democrat caucus, I think there's going to be the biggest change, I think, will be their desire to do oversight and investigations, and that's a legitimate function of Congress. And the Republicans certainly did, pursued the Obama administration, with fervor when they had control and when President Obama was in the White House. But you are already starting to see that up on Capitol Hill. It won't be happening nearly as much on the Senate side, but the focus will be on the House side. And so I think that will be, from an outsider's perspective, watching cable news and what is coming out of Washington and driving the nightly news, if you will, it's going to be the Democrats' focus on investigating the administration, from everything to how former EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt ran the building to child detention issues at Department of Homeland Security, to the president's tax returns, to the Trump family business dealings. And of course, we haven't even mentioned yet the issue of potential Russian collusion that many in Congress are wanting to investigate. And so that is kind of be the umbrella, if you will, of which everything else kind of happens. So that doesn't mean that other things won't happen. I think in looking at the House beyond their investigative activities, I think there's a few campaign promises that they made when they ran that they're going to try to kind of check off. Just this week, one of them was gun control. They passed a few gun control bills this week out of the House. I anticipate in the next couple of weeks they will pass a campaign finance reform, ethics reform legislation, drug pricing, as we mentioned earlier. I anticipate there will be some legislative action there. Look for things in the area of minimum wage and minimum wage and pay fairness legislation. There's been some hearings scheduled on that. A lot of that legislation will pass the House, but the Democrat-controlled House, but won't go anywhere in the Republican-controlled Senate. But some of the other issues that we certainly hope do pass the House and the Senate as I mentioned earlier, was USMCA, the new NAFTA 2.0. That is something that is critically important to us, and we anticipate this spring, perhaps summer, maybe even slips into the fall, but we'll be working hard to get that passed through the House, which I think will be the heavier lift. Will be getting it through the Democrat-controlled House, and the Senate shouldn't be, knock on wood, shouldn't be as difficult. But again, all of this activity will be kind of overshadowed in a lot of ways, I think, by the investigations that will be going on at the committee, different committees on Capitol Hill.
Makes for great reality TV, doesn't it?
Yeah, the cable news will have plenty of fodder this year for sure.
Well, it was amazing. I was watching a little bit of news last night, and they were talking how it was incredible that we had one of the biggest meetings in our history with Trump and the North Korean leader. And most times you would break away and cover that in a big way, but instead of breaking away and covering that, it was a little tiny box, and they were basically on the Michael Cohen trial as opposed to, or testimony, as opposed to going to the big thing that really impacts us from a foreign policy. So it just kind of tells you mentally where we've gone with priorities in terms of what we want to listen to with a lot of people. So kind of crazy stuff. So you mentioned minimum wage. That's usually a state. I mean, are they looking at the national minimum wage for the country?
There will
dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, there will be, and that's one of the issues that that Democrats, most Democrats ran on in the 2018 elections was a raise in the federal minimum wage. And there are, you mentioned that is a that is a largely, has been at least, a state-driven and municipal-driven policy issue, and you've got certain large states and certain large cities, Seattle, New York City, others who have minimum wage up north of $15. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense for a manufacturer who's operating in a small town in Wyoming, or someplace where the cost of living is entirely different. And so that's an example of sometimes the federal government doesn't necessarily always have the best one size fits all approach on policy.
So when you look between now and the end of the year, working towards 2020, just in the end of 19, what are kind of the pillars and the key policy issues that NAM is going to be really pushing aggressively to see some movement on, hopefully?
Infrastructure is going to be something that is a big priority for us as an association, but also as a country. We've got we're falling behind as a country as it relates to, when compared to other developing countries and developed countries, who you look at China, who is aggressively building out infrastructure, not just in the country, but helping build it out all over the world, in parts of the world where they are doing business.
Right.
And actually today, just this morning, our president and CEO was in Arizona with our chairman of the NAM, our chairman, David Seaton, who's the CEO of Fluor Corporation. They rolled out a comprehensive plan called Building to Win, and it's our similar to the immigration plan that we put out. Building to Win is a comprehensive look at the state of infrastructure in our country, in the need to invest not just in roads and bridges and airports, in rail, but waterways, and also 5G internet infrastructure, if you will, to allow businesses to keep pace with the rest of the world. And so that will be a big focus of ours. The president, as I mentioned earlier, spoke a little bit about infrastructure in his State of the Union speech. Infrastructure tends to be an issue that both sides agree upon. We're in this polarized environment, as we've discussed, but oftentimes in a divided government situation, doing hard things legislative things is easier if both sides have to bear a little bit of the burden. So we're going to try to take advantage of that situation, if you will, to promote the need to do a big infrastructure bill. Both sides, everyone kind of agrees on the need. It's easy to come to an agreement on how to spend money, on ways to on projects, and the need to spend the money. The rub always becomes on where does the money come from, and I think that's what, similar to immigration, it's a difficult. The reason that it's not easily done is because it's a difficult thing for all sides to come to an agreement on. But in addition to infrastructure, as at the risk of sounding like a broken record, USMCA is another top focus for us, to make sure that we get that new NAFTA rewrite, NAFTA 2.0, ratified by Congress. The alternatives to that don't look very good. The president has basically said, he campaigned on this. NAFTA was, this was his words, NAFTA was horrible. We're gonna redo it. So he has now negotiated this new deal, and he hasn't officially threatened to pull out of NAFTA if the old NAFTA, the current NAFTA,
right,
doesn't pass the USMCA deal. But he has held that threat over lawmakers' heads, and so we don't think there's any other bigger issue facing us immediately right now than helping get USMCA done.
Real quick, what is the pushback on passing? I mean, what's the negative end of that?
I think as I mentioned earlier, the biggest, we view it as the House of Representatives being kind of the heaviest lift, the most difficult part of this job.
Sure.
If we were in a different environment and Donald Trump wasn't the president, I think it would be a lot easier. There clearly is a political element to this.
Right, no doubt.
Where there's hesitance from some, certainly not all, but from some to not want to give the president a win. But there are also legitimate, there certainly are legitimate policy concerns as well, in the environmental space, in the enforceability of some of the labor provisions. And those are issues that we think can be worked out, but they shouldn't be allowed to derail this process entirely.
Right. No. Something we haven't mentioned a great deal of is, where do we stand on some of the trade issues going on?
Yeah, and I'm sure that's the tariff, 232 tariffs, steel and aluminum, I'm sure are a huge concern to your members. Those are separate from the steel and aluminum tariffs are separate from USMCA.
Right.
Though many members of Congress are trying to bring them together, saying we want the elimination of 232 steel and aluminum tariffs. You, the Trump administration, lift those from Canada and Mexico before we even consider passing the USMCA. And so they are still in effect. Those 232 steel and aluminum tariffs. There are also the much more broader tariffs that the president had levied on Chinese, $200 billion worth of Chinese goods that he had. There's currently a 10% tariff on that $200 billion list of $200 billion of goods. He had said on March 1st, I'm going to increase that to 25% if we don't make, we, the United States and China, make progress on some very badly needed reforms from the Chinese end in terms of essentially stopping stealing the American companies' intellectual property, forcing transfer of intellectual property. The good news is that while they haven't come to a deal, the U.S. and Chinese negotiators, they are making progress to the point where the president has recently said that I'm not going to increase those tariffs from 10% to 25%, but he's going to kind of keep them on the back burner as a carrot and stick approach. So we're optimistic that they're moving in the right direction to get a good enforceable Chinese-U.S. trade agreement on these trade differences. And then separately on the steel and aluminum 232 with China and Mexico, the USTR ambassador Robert Lighthizer and other senior members of the administration have been making pretty positive comments recently about the ultimate end game for getting those tariffs released.
Right. So we talked about infrastructure, MCA, and then what we just talked about with what we just talked about. The trade agreements. Lost my thought there for a second. Trade agreements. So those three, you're about to say before I interrupt you on that. What are some of the other pillars that you're going to be really pushing?
You know, I mentioned tax earlier. I mentioned the tax reform of 2017, as well as the need to fund infrastructure. While we want to see infrastructure move forward, what we don't want to see is a total rewrite or throwing the old tax, the current tax code away in order to find revenue to pay for that. That, you know, while the infrastructure would be good for us as manufacturers and for the economy, you'd be undoing everything that the positive effects of tax reform that have resulted in the economic growth that we discussed earlier.
Right.
So we'll be doing a lot of educating. There's over 100 new members of the House and Senate who are now just finishing their second month on the job. We'll be doing a lot of educating and playing defense on tax reform where necessary. Regulatory, you know, our policy folks here are still working diligently with the Obama administration at the relevant agencies. At EPA, I know, is an agency that's important to your members, and we're going to continue to work with them as they continue to promulgate, you know, regulations that are going to be helpful for manufacturing and not hurtful. So that'll be an area of activity. You know, I also anticipate. I don't know. I'm not going to wager a guess on whether we'll see any workforce-related legislation, but you know, related to immigration, as we talked about earlier, the need for more workers and skilled workers. You know,
right.
There are things that we can be doing to help, you know, upskill and retrain workers that we have here to keep up with the demands, particularly and the needs, particularly in the manufacturing space. And that's something that we've been here at the NAM have been very involved with. The Manufacturing Institute, the nonprofit arm of our association that I mentioned earlier, they've been kind of innovative in a number of programs, including a program called Heroes Make America.
Right.
They're partnering with the military, the U.S. military, and allowing training to happen for active duty military members at certain bases who are getting ready within the last year before they transition out of active duty. They are able to join a training program that we've been putting on and kind of testing out at certain bases to allow our active duty servicemen and women who have learned a lot of these key skills on their job to how to transition that into the private sector to then, you know, be better able to, you know, fill some of the workforce needs that we have in the manufacturing sector.
Well, you know, it's kind of funny. We have this. If you look at demographic charts, we have about an 8-year problem of there being not enough workers to fulfill all the growth that we need. And I always tell people with 4 million millennials is 100 million for the next 25 years. They're between 6 and 33. We have plenty of workers, but they just have to turn 18, 21, graduate college, and then get some experience and into the workforce. So we got plenty of workers coming, but it's you know, we got to wait 10 years. So immigration is a huge thing. So, well, Jordan, one big thing. So we got about 6 minutes. I know you have to run out and go to the Speaker Majority's office to speak with them, which was great. I hope that goes well. But the last thing we hadn't discussed, I just want to get your thoughts on it. Feel free to say, Tom, we haven't figured it out yet. But I know with the Congress in there for 2 months, you got this thing called the Big Green New Deal. I mean, in short form, can you let members know what is that all about? And is there any context to it? And what does it mean? I know that's getting a lot of press.
Yeah, it's a great question. We're still trying to figure out what the Green New Deal means. I think more than anything, it is a aspirational document by some in the Democrat Party who, in short, want to move the American economy in 10 years, essentially entirely off of fossil fuels. And that would be certainly detrimental, I think is probably a diplomatic term to use for the economy and for the manufacturing sector. The manufacturers have led in a lot of ways in making improvements to the way that we operate as an industry, as our members operate their companies, being environmentally conscious.
Absolutely.
And that's the type of ingenuity that we can continue and should continue to move forward without these drastic, federal intervention that would, disrupt at a great deal our economy. And so I don't. It remains to be seen on whether the Green New Deal that was proposed wasn't even legislation. It was more of an aspirational document. It remains to be seen on whether any legislation comes out of that. I can't imagine that the entire House of Representatives would pass something that drastic. And if they did, it certainly would go nowhere in the Senate. And for whatever reason, if it did, which it wouldn't, not this Senate, the president would most certainly not pass it. So it really is more of a plan right now that I think is and it has kickstarted a lot of conversations. And it's going to get tied in with the 2020 presidential election. You've got a number of incumbent Democrat senators who are running for president. They want to be the Democrat nominee to take on Donald Trump next year. And they are all kind of gravitating towards the need for some kind of Green New Deal. And so it's certainly something for us to watch. We're going to be educating on it, but I don't think there's any imminent legislative passage of it right now.
Awesome. Well, here's what I want to say in closing is I know that members out there listening to this, studies have shown that most employees get the majority of their information for how they want to vote and select the candidate from their employer, the information an employer provides them on a lunchroom board and an office space. I know NAM has a phenomenal election center that will be put together when it comes out, when we get close to moving towards 2020. So I just want to encourage everybody listening to this from the government affairs standpoint. Call your legislator when we put out anything or NAM puts out anything, pass the election center stuff. No matter how they're going to vote, they can at least make an informed choice to the election center. They can even find out where they can register to vote. We're trying to provide the path and the platform for you to make educated decisions in your companies with your employees on the area of politics and government affairs. So please do that. And tune in March 25th for the next Heat Treat Live. We're going to be talking about hiring military veterans in very mechanical, technical areas. I know NAM has a program that they've put together. MTI has partnered with Bradley Morris, one of the largest staffing firms transferring military into private sector. And we'd love you to get involved with that. We're going to have one of their key executives talking about that on March 25th on why, the need, the supply, and how you can tap into that through MTI. So members, Jordan, thank you very much for your time. I know you got to run to the speakers staff. Thank you. Any last words you'd like to say to the members?
To echo what we said earlier and what you just reiterated, please stay active. Help Tom out when Tom has action alerts. Your voice really matters in the federal policymaking arena. And so keep doing what you're doing, Tom. We love having you and MTI as part of the NAM family. So thank you so much for all that you're doing, and thanks for allowing me to join you all today.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Members, remember two things. One, our goal is your success every single day, and you're not just strong, you're MTI strong. We're going to here to answer your questions. Call us anytime you need us. Have a great day, and thank you for your membership.